NTFS allows us to set security permissions so that other individuals have access and permissions for certain files, folders, printers, and so on. A lot of students find this confusing, and that's because there are a lot of nuances to it. And another reason is that it also interacts with sharing permissions that we'll talk about later. Now, there's a lot to this, and I may take a couple of videos to cover it all. First of all, these are granted by NTFS. NTFS is what makes it possible for us to set these security permissions. And I've given here how we get to it. So I'm going to open a folder here. Let's just open my PCC folder up here and go to Properties and then the Security tab. And here's where permissions can be set. Right now we already have 4 different, actually these are all groups, and you can tell they're groups by the little 2 people in the icon there. If they were users, there would only be a single person in the icon. But we have 4 groups, and each of these groups has certain sets of permissions. So for example, regular users, in other words those who are not administrators, don't have modify or full control or write access to this folder, whereas administrators do have that access. The system itself is also a user, or actually a group, and the system, in other words, Windows itself. So Windows has access to everything unless you take it away, and there's some interesting strategic times you would want to do that, such as when Windows keeps changing something that you don't want it to change. So I've used that quite strategically at times. Authenticated users, those logged on. Okay, so we have 4 groups and different access to those 4 groups. Now you notice that these are grayed out. Well, that's because obviously I'm not in the edit mode. If I'm in the edit mode, then I can check and uncheck. Well, there's still some grayed out. Well, why are they grayed out, you might ask? And I'll show you that. It's really interesting. If I click on Advanced, you'll see that they are grayed out because they are inheriting from the parent object. So the parent folder is the one that's passing these along. Anytime you create a folder or move a folder, it inherits the permissions from the parent. It also, in this case, is passing those permissions along to children folders and files. So that's why those are grayed out. I would have to remove this capability. I can disable inheritance and replace all children object permission entries with inheritable permissions, permissions from this object, which they already are, so I wouldn't need to do that. But if I disable inheritance, then I can get access to those individual things. All right, let's go back here and take a look now. It says security permissions are set for individual users or a group. Now you saw groups over here, but not individuals. So let's edit this, and I'm just going to add, and we'll add Fred, which is just a dummy account that I've created on my machine for purposes like this, for demonstration. And I can give Fred whatever permissions I want here, and I can use deny and allow. Now Fred already has these permissions, which are inherited from the fact that Fred is a standard user. And so you'll notice that the users and Fred all have the exact same set of permissions here, because Fred is inheriting it from users. So since Fred already has those permissions, I can set individual deny or allow permissions for Fred, and it turns out that the highest permissions wins, and that's in their next bit here. Security permissions are additive. The most liberal permissions apply when there's a conflict. So if the group gives certain permissions and individual gives certain permissions, then the most liberal one applies. Now be very careful here. That is not true when we're interacting between NTFS and sharing permissions. In that case, we'll learn that the most restrictive applies. But within NTFS permissions, the more liberal applies. I'm going to go ahead and cut this off, and I will continue it in a new video about the rest of this.